Since completing his PhD thesis on academic precarity in 2019, Christian has turned his efforts towards volunteering and hosting a range of local and online community events. His goal is to cultivate more familiar and affectionate relations between otherwise disparate individuals and communities in an increasingly online, asynchronous world. Christian, here's your soapbox.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thanks for organising this. Thanks also to Sally, as always, to our speakers, to our audience, and happy birthday to Dan for the other week. Okay, so I've got a tantalizingly short amount of time. If anybody would like references on my writing, I've put my email address at the top of the chat box so you can contact me afterwards. Okay, so the social activism group bills itself as having two focuses. One is sociology about activism, which uses theory and research and vitally draws on related fields to create knowledge and improve understanding. The second is sociology for activism, i.e. how can we be better activists? How can we improve our chances of achieving the change that we want? So in this talk, I'm bringing these two together in order to just give a few recommendations. It's informed by three main areas. The first is my observations as an organizer. The second is my sociological work on precarity and the pandemic. And the third is a human factors concept called mental workload, which informed my more recent work as a research assistant for a UWA report commissioned by the Australian Navy. So as Anne pointed out, I have my fingers in lots of pies for organizing events and coordinating communities. When COVID hit, of course, that had to go online, and I started getting more and more people contacting me saying that they are zoomed out, which you're familiar with, and saying that they just don't have the energy to engage in this kind of stuff, to talk with people or have anything to do with an event with the word politics in it, for instance. Now, these are clever, conscientious, and respectable people who are saying this, okay? So for many of you, this will sound familiar. We've all heard about pandemic fatigue, right? I would say that this is part of a broader sociological context. So what do I mean by this? Last week, The Conversation publicized a meta-analytic study by the American Psychological Association, which linked insecurity and unemployment to the tendency for people to develop negative personality traits. So they become less conscientious and more neurotic the more insecure they are. People familiar with my work and the work of Guy Standing would be familiar with how precarity leads to the 4 A's of anomie, anxiety, anger, and alienation. The less secure you are, the more uncertain you are, the more jaded and pessimistic and less engaged you become. So while the social activism literature focuses on strong social ties and a sense of duty and identity as positive forces for people engaging in activism, I see these dimensions which I've listed as negative forces, as problems to be addressed and overcome. And I think that human factors can help us to understand this. So I want to draw on the idea of human factors and mental workload to frame this issue and give some tips to address it. So human factors represents the attempt to account for the human in the analysis of complex systems. It's become increasingly popular in the wealthier and more dangerous domains. So industry, railroads, airlines, military, Navy, places where they stand to maim people if they get things wrong, okay? The idea is that you can't treat people like mechanistic parts of a system, okay? While you can put a command into a computer and it will execute it, you don't need to worry about whether or not the computer is more concerned with its own time or its own career mobility, or if it's tired because it's been out all night drinking or trying to get its little computer babies just to go to sleep. Now, these are human dimensions, human factors. It's humans that have to deal with pandemic fatigue and anxiety. So the concept of mental workload comes from human factors. I'll simply call it load. It's been formulated and measured in a lot of different ways. It doesn't mean the amount of work that you have to do, okay? Rather, it refers to the conditions in which work are imposed, the context, and how people experience and respond to that. It's the mental checklist. It's what you have on your plate, what you have on your shoulders, what you have on your mind. This can include anything from workspace design and equipment. Human factors is also known as ergonomics, which you would have heard of in the workplace, to an intimidatingly cluttered inbox. Who here has gone into their email and you see how many emails you have, and all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I've aged 50 years and I just want to roll over and go to sleep. So these all desert demands on your mental load. The more load one has to contend with influences the perceived effort of the task. In this way, load impacts your motivation, your confidence, your attentiveness, your mood, your fatigue, your ability to communicate effectively and considerately with other people. So here we arrive at the theoretical point, right? The sociology about activism. With enough perceived load, even seemingly minor tasks, responding to emails, making a bed, doing the dishes, getting in touch with friends, or committing to social events can become exhausting. You kick the can down the road and things fall off your plate and you don't do it. This in turn can be viewed in our context of our historical moment and the disruptive material conditions we've gone through, not just with the pandemic, but with our 21st century noisiness. We've seen spreading precarity, increased pressure to stay informed with the news and the proper norms and expectations of our culture, increasing demands placed on people wanting to keep or at least find jobs and hopefully establish a stable living. And as critics of our neoliberalized society observe, people are experiencing a narrowing of horizons down to the present. You can't plan ahead. You think a few weeks at a time, okay? An increased embeddedness in the tertiary 24/7 information-soaked society. Okay, so here we begin to see the broader picture, the sociological picture, in which the aforementioned psychological study linking insecurity to negative personality traits intersects with Standing's work on the precarity and the 4 A's. We begin to see how feeling zoomed out is not just about Zoom, and how pandemic fatigue is not just about concerns to do with the virus. Okay, so that's a theoretical point. Now we have the sociology for activism, the recommendations. So if you accept that feeling overloaded impacts motivation and engagement, we can thus say that load and contributing to load poses a problem for anybody wanting to organize events and engage people in activism. Moreover, it is not enough to simply tell people to take on less, to say no to more, or to organize their calendars better, because this places the onus on the individual and ironically, viciously creates more load. No, we can do things as sociologists, as coordinators, as organizers to help people out here. So I'm going to give you just 5 quick dot point strategies to help people out. This is just a beginning place. So number 1, set regular times and places for your events so people don't need to follow up on where they are and when they are every time they happen. Okay, if you have important news to give it to them, give it to them at the event. Okay, this will give them some sense of stability and constancy. Number 2, of course, avoid unnecessary emails and clearly mark keywords in your email so that when people search for them to find that important information a week or a month later, they can do so easily without trawling through the inbox. As academics, we do this with keywords when we write journal articles. Why not when we write emails? Number 3, when inviting people to an event, let them know that their presence is enough. Okay, the obsession with potlucks for activist organization events deters people, I promise you. A law of a meal is not as strong as the bummer of having to think about what to cook, find the time to cook it, and so on. Number 4, give people a chance to develop their civic skills and their networks before you try to recruit them. If they know what they're being signed up for and they feel like they've signed up themselves, they will engage more than if you just track them down after meeting them and try to get their email address. And number 5, remember that a no leadership, democratized horizontal approach to organizing can result in vacillation, in a 3-hour meeting just going with people being heard rather than decisions being made, and that can undermine momentum. Do not presume that it's the best approach for moral reasons. Okay, you need to think, how are you contributing to load as well, I would contend. So I'm going to conclude by saying these are simple ideas, I hope you can all see how they're aimed at the goal of reducing load. I also hope you can see how it's just something that you can keep in mind. You can come up with other tips for yourself, not only to improve the likelihood of people engaging in activism and engaging in civil society, but also to help reduce the load that is being alive in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Comments and questions to Christian?
I'll just make a comment, and thanks, Christian. I love the way that you had some practical tips. I'm definitely going to do the email, or not do the email thing, and do the highlighting keyword thing. I think that's a great idea. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
No, I'm thinking, Christian, but when we get into the plenary, you've given us some very practical stuff, and I'm really glad Ramon is here, because I can foresee a conversation between a number of us about how do we mobilise the wisdom that you've presented with us today to be a more effective association, because we are having our virtual event later this year. Any other questions or comments to Christian? Alistair?
Perhaps just one. How do you see the balance between, if you like, systemic responses to this? In the sense, I'm thinking here about the increasing concern about, say, mental health in higher education, which has taken off as an industry over the last couple of years. Systemic responses to it, because it seems to me in part it is a systemic problem, and what I've sometimes termed sticking plaster responses, which institutions are really good at, such as putting on little bits of workshops here or there, or giving you a link to a website or whatever. How do you think that plays out, that sort of interaction?
That's a great question, Alistair. It comes down to what I said before about positive strategies and negative strategies. So the positive ones often put the onus on the individual. Have you checked in on your well-being? Have you done yoga? You know, how is your breathing? Are you breathing deeply enough? Right? Do you say no to enough? Are you good mates with your calendar? All of these are individualized, positive approaches. They're band-aids on top of a rash, okay? Which is funny when I think about it, because that's not a good way to treat a rash anyway. Okay. What I'm proposing is a negative approach. Rather than giving more, take some away. So do what you can to decrease the noise, decrease the load. In the Navy, in airlines and industry, they know that if you give people 10 tasks, even if they're really easy, if you give them 5, they'll do those ones better, even if they're simple. So as a systemic approach, I'm saying rather than the neoliberalized discipline of the self, which we see, you know, take care of yourself as life gets harder. What I'm proposing is that we as public sociologists and as organizers do what we can to decrease load. Does that help answer your question?
It does. So you're a supporter of the slow work, slow life approach?
Most definitely. There were lots of buzzwords in my talk, like 24/7. So that would have brought things to mind, for sure.
Excellent.
Thank you, Christian.